Imagine you're strapped into a speeding metal box, right? You're careening down a potholed highway. The driver is just totally reckless, weaving in and out of oncoming traffic with zero hesitation.
Oh, man. Just a total nightmare scenario.
Right. And the vehicle is completely overcrowded. Like, people are crammed against you, shoulder to shoulder. Maybe someone is practically sitting on your lap.
Yeah, you literally can't even move.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And your life is entirely out of your hands. You're moving at this terrifying speed, and you realize in this moment you are utterly powerless.
I mean, every time the chassis rattles, every time you narrowly miss a pedestrian, your stomach just completely drops.
So what is the one thing that can save you? When you're sitting in that seat, staring down a cliff edge, what actually works? Is it, more government rules?
Right, like a stricter law signed by someone in a capital city hundreds of miles away.
Yeah, exactly. Or is it something else entirely? Because today, for this deep dive, we have an absolute mission. We're looking at an incredibly hard-hitting piece of research.
And it's a study that completely shatters how we think about rules. Two researchers, James Habyarimana and William Jack, they actually went to Kenya to test this exact life-or-death scenario.
They didn't just, sit in a boardroom and theorize. They looked at the cold, hard data of two vastly different road safety interventions.
And what they found is, well, it's just mind-blowing. It's a complete face slap to anyone who blindly trusts the system.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
Because we're not just talking about Kenyan traffic here, are we?
Not at all. I mean, the dusty streets of Nairobi are basically acting as a laboratory for the rest of the world. This is a profound revelation about human behavior.
And the illusion of top-down control. We're going to dive into this hidden logic of how the world actually works.
Exactly. We're going to see why the harshest, most severe government rules often just turn into like a cheap theater performance.
Yeah, and how a solution costing just a few cents absolutely crushed a multi-million-dollar government mandate.
It's wild. But to start, I mean, we really have to talk about this massive illusion we all buy into. Why do we so blindly worship authority and strict rules?
Think about it. Whenever society faces a huge crisis, whether it's a traffic epidemic, an economic meltdown, whatever, our knee-jerk reaction is always the same.
We immediately cry out for stronger, harsher government regulation. We basically want the iron fist.
We want someone in a suit to bang a gavel and say, this is illegal now.
Yeah, and there's a deep psychological comfort in that iron fist, right? We feel safe when someone official signs a piece of paper declaring the bad things are over.
We just desperately want to believe that writing a rule actually alters human behavior.
But the researchers point out this terrifying reality. The only thing worse than having no rules is having incredibly strict rules that are completely hollow.
Because those hollow rules just force reality into a deeper, darker abyss. All while the public is looking the other way, happily convinced the problem is solved.
That's so true.
It's like putting a giant, heavy-duty steel padlock on a door that's made entirely out of tissue paper.
Oh, that's a perfect analogy.
Right. The lock looks incredibly intimidating from the street. You walk by and think, wow, that house is secure. Nobody's getting past that padlock.
But it just creates this totally false sense of security. The homeowner goes to sleep thinking they're safe.
Exactly. While the house gets completely robbed by someone who just punched a hole straight through the paper walls.
The padlock didn't stop the crime at all. It just made people stop paying attention to the actual vulnerability.
Yeah, it's just the theater of safety. And to really grasp how this paper door dynamic plays out in the real world, we first have to understand the true scale of the crisis Kenya was facing.
Because it wasn't some abstract thing. It was a daily, bloody reality.
Yeah.
Which brings us to a massive misconception about global health.
Right. If you ask people right now to name the real grim reaper in the developing world, like the biggest daily threat to human life, what do they usually say?
Oh, they always say malaria or mass famine or waterborne diseases.
Yeah, we're totally conditioned to think of mosquitoes and contaminated water. But the data just slaps that assumption right in the face.
It really does. Because the projections show that by 2030, road traffic accidents are going to account for 3.7% of all global deaths.
Wait, let me just repeat that. 3.7%. That is double the mortality rate of malaria.
Double. It's an ignored global killer hiding in plain sight. It's this man-made epidemic that we just completely underestimate.
And in Kenya specifically, the focal point of this crisis is a vehicle known as the matatu. For you listening, if you aren't familiar, visualize a 14-seater minibus.
Right. They're often colorfully painted, blasting music. They are the absolute lifeblood of the Kenyan transportation network.
Because, formal state-run transit was basically non-existent, so this massive private industry sprang up to fill the void.
They carry a huge percentage of the population every single day. From rural farmers to urban office workers, everyone uses them.
But they also carry a staggeringly high death toll. We're talking about over 3,000 road deaths a year in Kenya during the height of this crisis.
And to understand why, you have to look at the economics. It's not just drivers wanting a thrill, it's entirely about economic survival.
Right, break that down for us, because the incentive structure is wild.
So most of these matatus are owned by individuals or small cartels. They rent the vehicle to a driver for a fixed daily fee.
Okay, so the driver starts the day in the hole.
Exactly. They pay that flat fee in the morning. Everything they earn above that is their take-home pay to feed their family. Everything below means they lose money.
So it turns driving into this high-stakes daily gamble.
It does. Accidents are just treated as a rational cost of doing business. The faster you drive, the quicker you finish a route, and the more fares you collect.
Because speed literally equals survival for them. Even if that 14-seater is packed with 20 or 30 people standing shoulder to shoulder.
Right, they're weaving through the chaotic streets of Nairobi or careening down the highway, just desperate to maximize profits.
But the external costs, the cost to those innocent passengers and the pedestrians on the street, those are catastrophic.
The state was looking at thousands of deaths. The public outrage was absolutely boiling over. People were demanding blood.
Or at least they were demanding the iron fist, and the government decided to deliver.
Oh, they delivered big time. In February 2004, the Kenyan government unleashed the Michuki rules.
Named after the Minister of Transport, John Michuki.
Yeah. And calling this an iron fist almost feels like an understatement. This was the harshest, most uncompromising crackdown in the history of their transit system.
This wasn't a gentle public awareness campaign. This was a massive overnight overhaul.
Every single matatu was suddenly required to install mechanical speed governors.
Wait, explain what that actually means practically.
It's a physical device bolted to the engine, permanently capping the speed at 80 kilometers per hour. That's about 50 miles per hour.
So if the driver floors the gas pedal, the engine literally just cuts out.
Exactly. They physically stripped the vehicles of their ability to speed. And it went way beyond just speed limiters.
Yeah, they required passenger seatbelts for every single seat, which was basically unheard of before this.
They forced every matatu to paint a highly visible, continuous yellow stripe down the side so police could instantly spot them.
It's like literally painting a giant target on their backs for the regulators.
Precisely. They also had to stick to strict, officially documented routes. No more detours. They limited passengers strictly to 13 plus the driver.
So no more cramming extra people in for cash.
None. And the drivers had to wear official uniforms, post their photos inside the cab, and pass incredibly strict police vetting.
Let's talk about the financial weight of this, because it is staggering. Just the retrofitting alone, the speed governor, the seat belts, the paint job costs, an agonizing $750 per vehicle.
In 2004. In that specific economy, $750 is a massive capital expenditure for a small-time operator.
I mean, it would be like demanding an independent taxi driver in a Western city pay $30,000 tomorrow just to keep their license.
It was economically devastating. The immediate aftermath was absolute chaos. Overnight, the government pulled thousands of non-compliant buses off the road.
Because they simply couldn't afford the $750 retrofit, right? So the supply of transport just vanished.
Poof. Gone. People were suddenly forced to walk 5-10 miles to work.
And the economics of scarcity kicked in immediately. Fares on the few legal buses that were left skyrocketed.
It was incredibly painful for the average working-class citizen. But, and here's where the psychology gets so fascinating, the public cheered.
They cheered. Despite the massive inconvenience, despite walking miles to work, they loved the Michuki rules. Why?
Because visually, the streets finally felt safe. You could look out your window, and instead of a terrifying, overcrowded van flying by, you saw an orderly, yellow-striped bus going 50 miles an hour.
The paper padlock was shining brightly in the sun. The government had done its job.
It perfectly matches our textbook expectation of how a functioning society is supposed to solve a crisis, right?
Totally. The government writes a strict law, imposes heavy costs, there's a brief, painful adjustment, and then society is fixed.
And initially, the government gets to take a massive victory lap. They release their official data a few months later, and it looks like a flawless triumph.
The official statistics showed an immediate, massive cliff drop in accidents. Fatalities and serious crashes fell by a staggering 20 to 40% almost instantly.
You're the regulator who wrote this law. You're popping champagne. You look like an absolute hero.
Yeah, if the story ended right here, it would just be a boring administrative success story about heavy-handed mandates saving lives.
But our researchers knew something that regulators often don't want to admit. You always have to question the underlying incentives of the data source.
Right, because government statistics, especially in environments with weak oversight, are very often built on what is visually apparent.
Or what's politically convenient to report, not what is fundamentally real in the long term.
Exactly. So what happens when independent economists refuse to take that political victory lap at face value?
They knew they couldn't trust police reports. Those can be massaged or fabricated. They needed a source that fundamentally cannot afford to lie.
They needed to follow the money. So they completely bypassed the government and went straight to the insurance companies.
Because insurance companies don't care about a politician's approval ratings. They only care about whether they have to pay out a claim for a smashed bumper.
The methodology here is just brilliant. They pulled highly granular daily claims data from 4 massive Kenyan insurance companies.
And they didn't just look at the matatus in a vacuum. They set up a comparison to isolate the real impact.
So let's break that down because we want to avoid any dense academic jargon. How do they actually measure this?
It's actually a super common sense concept. Imagine you want to know if a new fertilizer makes a plant grow faster.
Okay, I'm with you.
If you just put the fertilizer on one plant and it grows 3 inches, you might think, wow, this stuff is amazing. But what if it was just a really sunny month and all plants grew 3 inches anyway?
Ah, right. You don't actually know if your fertilizer did anything at all. You need a control group.
Exactly. You need an identical plant, same soil, same sun, but no fertilizer. In this case, the researchers looked at the insurance claims for the matatus, which had all these draconian new rules.
And they compared that to the claims data for private passenger vehicles.
Right, because private cars shared the exact same roads, same weather, same macroeconomic conditions, but they weren't subject to the new Michuki rules.
By comparing the two, they isolated the true specific impact of the government mandate, and what they found is an absolute face-slapping revelation.
I mean, it's completely wild. They mapped out the insurance claims over a 24-month period after the rules went into effect.
And the long-term statistical impact of the Michuki rules on actual accident rates was, wait for it, exactly 0.
0. Statistically indistinguishable from the rule never having existed at all. The entire regulatory framework did absolutely nothing to fix the danger.
But wait, this is where it gets super confusing. How is a 0% impact possible?
Right, because everyone saw the drop.
Yeah. The government saw a 40% drop in those first few months. The public physically saw fewer crashes. Where did that massive drop come from if the rule was a complete failure?
This is the genius of digging into the timeline. The researchers realized that the drop in the first month wasn't because drivers had a moral awakening.
Oh, because they were suddenly driving safer.
Exactly. It was a purely mechanical illusion. It's a denominator issue.
Oh, like, if I have a failing school and I want to reduce the total number of failed tests, I could improve the teaching. Or I could just expel half the students.
That's the perfect analogy. The total number of failures drops massively, but the school didn't get any better.
Wow. So the accident rate dropped by 40% simply because thousands of matatus were physically parked in garages.
Yes. They were waiting to get their expensive speed governors and seatbelts installed. They couldn't afford the $750, so they took their buses off the road.
There were fewer accidents simply because there were vastly fewer cars on the road to crash. That is insane.
The government mistook a temporary reduction in traffic volume for a permanent shift in safety behavior.
And the insurance data proved it. Because as soon as those vehicles scraped together the money, got their compliance certificates, and got back out on the street,
The deadly accident rates instantly bounced right back up to their historic, terrifying norms.
Okay, but here's where it gets really dark. How on earth does a massive national mandate completely fail to save lives once the cars are back on the road?
Right, because legally they have mechanical speed governors bolted to their engines.
They physically cannot go over 50 miles an hour. How are they still crashing at the exact same hyperlethal rate?
This is where the paper door gets punched right through by human greed and systemic corruption. You can mandate a piece of technology, but you cannot mandate integrity.
So what did they do?
The ink on the Michuki rules wasn't even dry before the drivers and local mechanics invented a brilliant, completely illegal workaround. They call them speed governors.
The name alone is amazing. A governing for the governor. How'd that even work?
It was essentially a hidden manual bypass switch wired into the dashboard, installed right alongside the official state-mandated speed governor.
Oh my God.
Yeah, it allowed the driver to secretly turn off the speed limiter while they were in motion.
So they could be on an open stretch of highway, flick the hidden switch, and race competing buses at 80 miles an hour.
Exactly. And then, if they see a police checkpoint up ahead,
They just flick the switch back, the engine cuts back to the legal limit, they roll through the checkpoint looking like a perfectly law-abiding citizen.
and then they flick it right back off a mile down the road. And the seatbelts. They were often terrible quality, just loose straps tied to the metal frames purely for visual compliance.
Nobody actually used them, but surely the police caught on to this. We're talking about a massive police state apparatus enforcing this.
Oh, they definitely caught on. They knew exactly what was happening. But here is the tragic twist of relying on top-down authority in a flawed system.
Right.
These strict new rules didn't empower the police to make the roads safer. They simply handed the police a massive, newly expanded menu of excuses to extort bribes.
It's like giving a corrupt referee an entirely new, incredibly strict rulebook. They don't use the new rules to clean up the game.
Nope. They just use the new rules to hand out more red cards to the teams that refuse to pay them off.
The game remains just as dirty and violent. It just becomes significantly more expensive to play.
That is precisely what happened. The regulator, in this case the police officer on the street, became the ultimate financial beneficiary of the safety crisis.
Because the legal fines for non-compliance were now so high, the police had massive leverage.
Exactly. You walk up to a driver and say, "I know you have a bypass switch. I see your yellow stripe is faded. Pay me a huge cut of your daily fares right now, or I will ruin your livelihood."
And the drivers are trapped. They pay the bribe as a new, inflated cost of doing business.
And here's the worst part. To make up for the lost income from the bribe, they actually have to drive faster and more recklessly to collect more fares.
The strict regulation literally fueled the reckless behavior it was designed to stop. That is a massive face slap.
The entire system just devolved into this massive theater performance of safety, masking a huge wealth transfer from the working class operators to the corrupt enforcers.
And the actual safety of the passenger. Utterly worthless. Which brings us to a moment of pure existential helplessness.
Yeah, I want you listening to project yourself back into that speed and matatu. You're in the passenger seat.
You now understand that the government's grand promises have completely failed. You can literally see the police officer taking a bribe outside your window at the checkpoint.
He pockets the cash, waves your bus through. Your driver clicks off the speed governor, slams the gas pedal, and starts speeding toward a blind curve.
What do? It's terrifying because you realize relying on a third-party authority, the state, the police, is an incredibly expensive hallucination.
The rules exist on paper, but reality is governed by bribes and speed. And this leaves the people at the bottom of the socioeconomic ladder completely paralyzed.
Are they just supposed to sit there in silence and wait for the inevitable crash?
This was the central philosophical tension the researchers faced. The state apparatus has proven it cannot solve the problem. The iron fist is corrupt.
So who saves the ordinary person when the system fails? And this is where the deep dive takes a pivot into the absolute surreal.
Because when Habyarimana and Jack realized the top-down approach was a total failure, they decided to look for another force entirely.
A deeply counterintuitive, almost laughable alternative to government regulation.
Let's fast forward to 2008. The Michuki rules have been exposed as totally hollow. The researchers launch a new trial across 2,300 long-distance matatus.
They basically set up the ultimate scientific A/B test. They randomly divide the buses. One half gets the intervention, the other half gets nothing, acting as the baseline control.
Right. And their first step was vital. They completely ignored the government. They completely ignored the police. They bypassed the entire machinery of the state.
Instead, they decided to use a piece of paper. Not a new law, not a mandate, just a sticker.
Literally just a sticker.
I remember reading this and thinking it had to be a typo. A sticker? What did it even say?
They designed these incredibly cheap graphic stickers to be pasted inside the passenger cabins of the experimental group. They featured jarring images of crashed buses with text in English and Swahili.
And the message was incredibly specific, right? It didn't ask the driver to slow down.
No, it spoke directly to the passengers. It said, "Don't just sit there, stand up, speak up."
The strategy was officially dubbed Heckle and Chide. And the conceptual goal was brilliant.
Take the power of regulation away from the corrupt state, take it out of the hands of the bribe-taking police officer, and hand it directly to the ultimate consumer.
The powerless passenger whose life is literally on the line. It's a pure strategy of direct bottom-up empowerment. Okay, I have to jump in here and push back on behalf of anyone listening who operates in the real world. Because conceptually, empowerment sounds great.
But practically,
Practically, this sounds completely insane. You were telling me that a massive government mandate carrying a $750 cost, the threat of physical arrest, and the entire weight of the state's legal system completely failed.
Yep, completely failed.
But a cheap 50-cent sticker telling a powerless, terrified passenger to yell at a hardened, corrupt minibus driver is going to work.
I know, it sounds totally absurd.
Yeah.
Visually and logically, the scales are completely unbalanced.
On one side, the heavy apparatus of the nation-state. On the other side, the annoyed voices of ordinary people inside a bus.
Most policymakers would assume this is a naive academic joke. Put yourself in that bus. In a society lacking the rule of law on the roads, why on earth would an aggressive driver listen to a random passenger complaining?
The driver controls the vehicle. They could just pull over and kick you off the bus in the middle of nowhere. They could say, if you don't like my driving, get out and walk.
And that profound skepticism is exactly what makes the data we're about to look at so paradigm shifting.
Because the researchers didn't rely on surveys asking people if they liked the stickers, right?
No, they put the stickers up, and then they went back to the only source of absolute truth, the hard, granular insurance claims data.
They waited to see what would happen to the actual physical accident rates for the vehicles that got the stickers versus the control group.
And the insurance data comes back. And I mean, the researchers' jaws must have hit the floor.
Tell us the numbers.
The results were nothing short of a statistical miracle. The overall accident rate for the vehicles randomly assigned to get the stickers plunged by a massive 50 to 63%.
Wait, over half? Just by putting up a piece of paper?
Yes, but it gets even crazier. Because keeping stickers up in a public bus is hard. They get peeled off. Drivers who hate them tear them down.
Right, of course.
But they did a sub-analysis. They looked specifically at the vehicles that successfully kept their stickers up and visually intact.
And what happened to that specific group?
For that group, the accident rate dropped by an unbelievable 73 to 93%.
A 93% drop.
Insurance claims for that group were essentially wiped off the map. Eliminated.
That is the ultimate face-slapping realization of this entire study. A sticker that cost pennies absolutely obliterated a multi-million-dollar, state-sponsored iron fist law.
It feels like a glitch in human behavior. How is this psychologically possible? Why did a piece of paper succeed where an armed police force failed?
To understand this, we have to break down the psychology of crowds. We have to look at the collective action problem.
Right, think about the dynamics of being on a public bus. Stopping a bad speeding driver is a public good. Everyone on that bus wants to survive.
Everyone wants the driver to slow down. The desire is completely unanimous. But nobody wants to be the first person to speak up.
Because if you're the first person to yell at the driver, you assume all the social risk. You might look crazy. You might get yelled at or physically threatened.
The personal cost of speaking up feels incredibly high, even if the group benefit is life-saving.
Exactly. It creates this well-documented psychological phenomenon called the spiral of silence.
Everyone sits there in terror, looking around, silently hoping someone else will be brave enough to say something.
And because everyone is silent, the driver looks in the rearview mirror, sees a quiet bus, and assumes nobody actually cares. So they push the speed even higher.
It's exactly like when you're in a quiet movie theater, right? And someone, a few rows up, is blatantly talking on their phone.
Oh, this is the worst.
Everyone in the theater's annoyed, you can feel the tension, everyone is exchanging angry glances, but nobody says anything because they don't want to be the angry guy causing a scene.
You suppress your outrage to maintain social harmony.
Until finally one person reaches their breaking point and shushes them. And what happens next?
Suddenly the whole theater chimes in. Yeah, turn it off. Be quiet.
Exactly. Once the seal is broken by a single brave person, the floodgates open.
That is the perfect analogy, and that is exactly the psychological mechanism the sticker triggered. The sticker acted as a psychological permission slip.
It gave the passengers a legitimate, authorized voice. It was written right there on the wall. An external authority validating their fear and explicitly instructing them to act.
It completely shattered the spiral of silence. Once one passenger points to the sticker and heckles the driver, hey, the sticker says speak up, you're going to kill us. They aren't just a lone complainer anymore.
They're following the official instructions on the wall. They have the moral high ground. And suddenly, the social pressure of the entire vehicle transfers directly onto the driver's shoulders.
Precisely.
What?
And this highlights a profound difference in leverage. The driver can easily ignore a speed limit sign on the side of the road because no one is there to enforce it.
They can easily pay off a corrupt cop with a fraction of their daily earnings.
But the driver cannot endure 20 angry, vocal, terrified customers sitting 2 feet behind his head, loudly and continuously screaming at him to slow down.
The localized social friction just becomes utterly unbearable. He cannot concentrate. He cannot assert dominance over an entire unified crowd.
So he concedes. He actually slows down.
This is so endlessly fascinating, but I really have to play devil's advocate here to protect the integrity of this deep dive, because this almost sounds too perfect, you know?
Researchers are naturally skeptical of their own miracles. They had to stress test their own data.
Right. Are we absolutely sure it was the passengers yelling that caused the drop? Could it be that the really bad, dangerous drivers just got annoyed by the stickers and the yelling and simply quit?
Like maybe they just left to drive for a different company that didn't have the stickers.
Exactly. And that's why the accident rate for these specific buses dropped. They just filtered out the bad apples.
That is a crucial question. The researchers looked into exactly that, tracking the driver turnover rate across all 2,300 matatus.
And what did they find?
Now, turnover in this hyper-competitive industry is very high generally. It was about 39% across the board. But when they compared the data, there was essentially zero statistical difference in driver turnover between the cars with stickers, which was at 41%, and the cars without stickers, which was at 37%.
So the bad drivers weren't fleeing the experiment. The exact same drivers were staying in the seats.
Exactly. The driver stayed, the vehicle stayed, the roads stayed the same. It was purely their driving behavior that changed.
Okay, but what about the money? I noticed in the methodology that the research team held a tiny weekly lottery to encourage drivers to keep the stickers on the walls, right?
Because they knew otherwise the drivers would just rip them down instantly.
So couldn't a skeptic argue that the drivers were just slowing down because they wanted to win the prize money? Maybe they didn't care about the passengers yelling at all. Maybe they just wanted the cash from the researchers.
This is the ultimate final doubt to kill. The researchers knew this would be a major criticism from other economists who always believe that financial incentives drive everything.
So how did they disprove it?
They used extreme math to debunk it. They did a wildly conservative, almost absurd mathematical calculation to see if the lottery could possibly explain a 93% drop in accidents.
Let's walk through this logic, because understanding how they prove this negative is fascinating.
Okay, so the weekly lottery paid out a total of about $60, distributed among a few random winners who kept their stickers intact.
That's a tiny amount of money compared to what they make driving daily.
Right, but let's pretend a driver only cared about that lottery money. The only way to stay eligible is to keep the bus out of the repair shop, which means not crashing.
Makes sense so far.
For a driver to slow down purely to increase his chances of not crashing so he can stay in the $60 lottery, he would have to have a deeply mathematically flawed understanding of the universe.
How flawed? Break down the variables for us.
They calculated that to make this financially rational, you have to weigh the guaranteed daily loss of income against the tiny probability of a payout.
Because slowing down guarantees you lose, say, $20 a day in extra fares.
Exactly. And the baseline probability of actually getting into a fatal crash on any given Tuesday is actually incredibly low, statistically speaking.
Okay, so to justify losing guaranteed daily cash for a tiny chance at $60.
The driver would have to believe that slowing down reduces crashes at a rate more than 30 times higher than actual reality dictates.
Wait, it gets even more extreme. The researchers found the true face-slapping multiplier in the data. To justify losing those fares just to chase this tiny prize, what would the driver have to mentally value the lottery at?
The math shows that given the low probability of winning, the driver would have to overvalue the financial reward by 65,000 times.
65,000 times. So basically, they would have to be hallucinating that the prize was millions and millions of dollars.
Exactly. They would have to be completely detached from economic reality. The ultimate conclusion is mathematically undeniable.
Where drivers absolutely did not care about the pennies from the lottery, the financial incentive was completely irrelevant to their behavior.
They slowed down for one reason and one reason only. They legitimately could not handle the collective, localized social pressure and ridicule from their own customers.
The passengers took the power back. It's just incredible. So what does this all mean? When the dust of the Kenyan roads settles, what is the grand takeaway that applies to the rest of the world?
The macro lesson here is profound. It tells us that when system-level institutions like governments, regulators, or police forces become bloated, weak, or corrupt,
Trying to use top-down iron fist rules to control the bottom tier of society is almost always a disaster.
it doesn't solve the problem. It just becomes a new tool to harvest wealth and power from the powerless. It becomes an extortion racket disguised as a safety measure.
So the answer isn't a stronger iron fist. We shouldn't be begging for thicker padlocks on paper doors.
No, truly effective regulation doesn't come from a desk in a capital city. It comes from decentralizing power. It comes from waking up the sleeping consumer.
You have to use the people whose lives are actually on the line, the actual stakeholders in the metal box, to directly check and balance out-of-control power.
When you give the powerless a voice and a psychological permission slip to use it, they will regulate the system more efficiently and more ruthlessly than any formal law ever could.
Which brings us to the ultimate question for you, the listener. How does this apply to your life right now? Are we currently sitting quietly in the back of a speeding bus, waiting for a corrupt or incompetent regulator to save us?
It's a chilling thought because the parallels are everywhere once you start looking. We really need to look beyond the Kenyan minibuses.
Look at the massive, opaque systems governing our lives today. Start small. Think about your local city council meetings or your corporate boardrooms where everyone knows a bad decision is being made, but the spiral of silence keeps everyone quiet.
But then scale it up. Think about Wall Street financial capital, harvesting the middle class, building financial instruments so complex no one understands them until the economy crashes.
Or think about the tech giants unleashing artificial intelligence that will fundamentally alter human society, scraping our data, changing how we work, how we think, how we interact.
The tech executives are the drivers pushing the speed limit. And what is our collective reaction?
Are we still naively crying out for perfect top-down regulation from politicians who openly admit they don't even understand how the technology works?
Are we waiting for an iron fist from regulators who might already be captured by the very industries they oversee?
The world is repeating history right in front of us. The massive systems are failing, or they're being manipulated by those at the wheel.
And the great delusion is that a new law will act as a magic wand. But the question isn't whether the government will save you.
The question is, when the tech giants and the financial titans start speeding toward the cliff, when you realize you are strapped into a vehicle moving at terrifying speed, have you found your sticker?
Are you ready to overcome the spiral of silence, stand up, and use your voice?
That is the true power of this deep dive. Sometimes the answers to our biggest, most modern structural problems aren't found in a Silicon Valley boardroom. They are hidden in the dust of a Kenyan highway, waiting for us to pay attention. Keep looking for those hidden truths. Thanks for diving deep with us.